Well, let's get to our first guest, someone who perhaps doesn't feel quite so positive about it, certainly as Tom Harwood, and that's Stephen Timms, Labour MP, member of the Brexit Select Committee and, of course, a leading Remain campaigner. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Good morning to you. What do you make of the deal? What's your verdict on the deal?
Well, I'm glad the Prime Minister has got a deal, but for me, it's as bad as Theresa May's deal, but it's bad in different ways. There's two ways to do Brexit. Both of them are bad. Either you stay close to the EU, but then you end up obeying rules over which you have no say at all, or you do a break with the EU, but that damages the economy because nearly half of our exports go to the European Union. And Theresa May's deal had more of the first problem. Boris Johnson's has more of the second. It is a harder Brexit than Theresa May was proposing, and that has bad consequences for the economy.
Why does it have bad consequences for the economy?
Because exporters will be faced with massive new red tape if they want to export to the EU. We won't have the export duty problems as long as the Prime Minister
Tariffs,
gets his trade deal. But there will be rules of origin, and that is particularly bad news for exporters.
And yet business, by all accounts, is crying out for the deal to be signed. And it may be that they just prefer this to no deal, but they also probably prefer it to ongoing prevarication. One of the things that business people have said again and again, whether for leave or remain, is that it's the uncertainty that's been the problem. 3.5 years, let's get on with it. Lots of business people are saying this is a deal they can live with.
Yes, I think they are saying that they could live. It's certainly better than no deal, that's true. But it doesn't end the uncertainty. There's going to be lots and lots of haggling to come if the Prime Minister gets this deal through. So my view, as you know, is that what we should do is have a referendum on this and ask the people, do you want to go ahead with leaving the EU on the basis of the deal that the Prime Minister has negotiated, or now we know the detail of this, do you want to stay in the EU?
Or a no deal? But again, this is the interesting thing. Why would Remain still be an option? We've got a deal. The options we had the vote in 2016, asked and answered. The answer was leave, and now it's leave with the deal or leave without a deal. I mean, I don't see any particular point for carrying on in that process unless there was a big demand from the British public for it. But I'm not sure there will be after this for a second referendum. But why on earth would Remain still be on the ballot paper?
Well, because that's the choice that the British people need to make.
Why? They've already made that choice.
I don't think there's going to be a big call for no deal now, because this is a pretty hard Brexit that Boris Johnson is supporting. But I think people do, and there will be a large number of people demonstrating in London tomorrow saying this wasn't what we were told was going to happen at the time of the referendum. We were told it was all going to be straightforward and great. These red tape problems wouldn't be there, and they're going to be calling tomorrow for a referendum, and I think they're perfectly entitled to do so. I can well understand why the DUP doesn't like this, because Theresa May commented about the sort of arrangement that's now proposed for Northern Ireland. No UK Prime Minister could ever agree to this. It is effectively giving Northern Ireland a big shove towards being part of Ireland, and I can't see them signing up to that, and I don't blame them for not doing so.
I think a lot of people understand their reservations, and of course it does actually give the issue of consent to this in the Stormont Assembly, no veto for one side or the other. So likewise, no veto for Sinn Féin, neither for the DUP. But again, I think it does appear that it's a deal that people can live with. We always knew it was going to be a fudge. But in the whole conversation with you, Stephen, with all due respect, it seems to me, I really have a strong feeling that there's a lot of clutching at straws going on. We had your party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, yesterday go on camera and say he thought this was a terrible deal. Absolutely not. Wouldn't vote for it. This would mean the selling off of all our assets to the Americans. I mean, he forgot to mention the words chlorinated chicken, but I know they were in his head. But this was even before he'd seen the deal. I mean, I didn't give my verdict until I had a chance to look at it and had a chance to look at some expert analysis from people on both sides of the debate. This deal was always going to be written off by the Labour Party just because it's Boris's Brexit deal. It's a Tory Brexit, ergo we can't vote for it.
Well, another difference between this deal and Theresa May's deal is a watering down of the commitment, the level playing field commitment that Theresa May signed up to. So on environmental standards, on workers' rights, consumer protection, the commitment to maintaining those has been watered down. And I think for Labour MPs, that is a big worry. And there was a lot of talk when Theresa May was Prime Minister of kind of strengthening those in order to win more Labour support. What Boris Johnson done has weakened them. And I think it will be difficult for many Labour MPs to support proposals along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, the question is, though, what's going to happen in the vote in the House of Commons tomorrow? There's a lot of talk of Labour tabling an amendment to this bill for requiring a second referendum, this confirmatory vote. That does seem to have sort of fallen by the wayside and gone off the heat there. Is that going to happen?
Well, let's see. That decision will be made by the middle of this afternoon. If there is an amendment going down for tomorrow, my name will be on it. But if it's not tomorrow, then an amendment certainly will be debated in the days that follow, and Parliament will have the chance to decide whether it wants there to be a further referendum on this new deal.
And in terms of where we do go from here, if the deal does fall tomorrow, if the deal goes through, then that's a different scenario altogether. We're leaving on the 31st of October. Life continues. If the deal doesn't go through, what happens next? Do you expect that Boris Johnson will write that letter asking for an extension? And if so, is there anything then to stop there being a general election? And how do you think Labour's going to do after turning down a deal and forcing us to have an extension?
Well, I think the Prime Minister will request an extension because the law requires him to do so. And what I would like to see an extension being used for is to have the referendum that we've been talking about, so that people get the chance to decide, do we want to leave the EU on the basis of this deal, or do we want to stay? And I think I would entirely accept that the outcome of that referendum would be binding. The matter would then finally be resolved, and we would proceed with whatever the decision coming out of that referendum is.
Let's talk about all of this with someone very much on the different side of the political divide from Stephen Timms. Richard Tice is MEP and chairman of the Brexit Party, and he joins us. Good morning to you, Richard.
Good morning to you.
Good morning.
It's an exciting 48 hours, isn't it?
Very exciting 48 hours. Now, Nigel Farage yesterday came out and basically said that he wasn't happy with this deal, and it wasn't the Brexit he wanted. Has a good long sleep made any difference to the views of the Brexit Party MPs on this? MEPs?
Look, I think our view is that we've been always campaigning for a clean break Brexit. There are some. Boris has made some progress. Given what an appalling deal the previous Theresa May deal was, he's made some progress, but there are still deep, deep flaws with this, and it's full of traps and risks unless there is a very, very strong negotiating team over the next months, heaven forbid, years, negotiating the free trade deal. One advantage is, in theory, there is the possibility to walk away from it at the end of the transition period. But question mark, would actually a Conservative negotiating team be prepared to do that? At the end of the day, we'll see what the numbers produce tomorrow. From our analysis, it's clearly going to be very close. As you've just indicated, it hinges, I think, actually on what Labour MPs do, whether it's sort of 6, 7 or potentially early teens vote for it. At the moment, I think Boris loses by somewhere between sort of 3 and 7 or 8. So it's incredibly close. I would expect, my analysis is that all of the ERG will vote for it.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we know the DUP won't vote for it, but there's thought of like many of those Labour MPs who were representing Leave constituencies but voted Remain themselves in 2016 may well come on board. Before we talk about what happens next, though, you were very much involved in the Leave.eu campaign along with Nigel Farage and Aaron Banks and others. You were up against Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings on the Vote Leave campaign. Everyone knows there's no love lost between those two groups, although I think both of you played an absolutely crucial role in getting that Leave vote over the line in 2016. This isn't the perfect clean break Brexit. I'm, like you, intensely relaxed about the idea of a no-deal Brexit. And I'm actually intensely relaxed about a second referendum, actually, because I still think that would be won by Leave. But there seems to be a very strong feeling in the country, if not perhaps among MPs, that people have had enough now. They'd like this done. And they feel that and when they look at the detail of this, that actually this is a Brexit deal. I would never have voted for the Withdrawal Agreement, would never have accepted that, would always have gone for Remain over that, though it was an absolute terrible sellout by a Remainer Prime Minister and a Remainer Civil Service. However, this is quite different in that we are not, the country is not in the EU Customs Union. We are not in the single market. We can make free trade deals. Yeah, we're having to still pay that 39 billion quid. Wouldn't have paid that much, but sometimes there is a time to sort of just give up on some things just for the ability to move on. Do you think this is a deal that you can live with as a Brexiteer?
Look, it's still a really bad deal, and as I say, it is.
Why? What makes it a bad deal?
Well, what makes it a bad deal is that for the whole of the transition period, you've got to take whatever rules the EU imposes on us. You've still got significant risks in terms of the links to defence. As you say, you've got to pay 39 billion, which you don't need to pay, and our concern is that in reality. Will a decent free trade deal be negotiated, or will actually we still be trapped to regulatory alignment, to the same sort of customs arrangements? All of these are the huge risks in this deal. It all depends, if it goes through, on how it's negotiated and whether or not a future negotiating team would be prepared to walk away. You can't, for example, there's the level playing field obligations in this, which, as I say, means that you'd have potentially the same rules and regulations. You wouldn't be able to use state aid if you wanted to. We've got deep concerns about, as I say, the defence obligations. So look, it's full of traps, it's full of pitfalls, but it is, no question, the Conservatives have made, Boris has made progress relative to the previous deal. And ultimately, to get a decent free trade deal in the future, what is needed is a strong Leave majority in the House of Commons. And we've always said we're happy to make Boris a hero and try and help him.
Okay, well, this is where it comes up to what happens next. Now, if there is an agreement in the House of Commons today and it gets through narrowly, it gets through, say, 3 or 4 votes maybe, then that's one thing. If, however, it's voted down and then what happens is all really up for grabs. Boris Johnson said it's deal or no deal. He's got a deal. We've had Jean-Claude Juncker, the European Commission President, even though, of course, it's not up to him. It's the EU 27 leaders who decide, said he doesn't see any reason, any need for a prolongation, as he calls it, an extension. Why would we need it? We've already got a deal. And yet, on a legal technicality, Boris Johnson is required tomorrow under the Benn Act, the so-called Surrender Act, to ask for that extension. In the event of either a deal going through or an extension being asked for, we're going to have a general election. How do you think this deal will go down in the event of a general election? And will the Brexit Party still be standing candidates in most seats? And will he be standing against Tory leavers in those circumstances?
Well, at the moment, there seems to be very little talk about a general election. There's far more talk about a confirmatory vote. So I think, let's see what happens over the next week or so. There's this idea that, they may not have a confirmatory vote tomorrow in the Commons, but they might in the early part of next week. I'm not sure the advantage of that. So I think we've got to wait and see. Let's see what happens. At the end of the day, if Boris, if he he needs a big Leave majority in order to see this through to a decent form of Brexit. That's what he needs. And at the moment, it's hard to see how he secures that. Let's see what happens over the next few days. Let's see if he gets it through tomorrow. It's clearly going to be very, very close.
And you mentioned this second referendum, people's vote, confirmatory vote. I mean, they just call it what they want, but it never seems to have a no-deal option on the table. I'd be very happy to have a second referendum with a Boris's deal or a no-deal Brexit and let the British people decide. But there's no way a referendum is going to be organised in this country by the MPs, the Remain majority in the House of Commons, unless it's got Remain on it, and they won't allow no deal on it either. In which case, is that the next big battle?
It could well be, and if so, then we will be ready for it. We've no doubt about that. We've already started to think about how that would play out. Look, we'll be ready for that battle. Equally, if there's a general election, then we'll work out what's the right thing to do in order to get a big thumping Leave majority. Because it's only by having a big Leave majority at a general election that a proper Brexit deal, a future trade deal, can be secured and negotiated. Because you've got to always have the confidence and the ability to walk away from the table. At least this deal does have that potential to walk away at the end of the transition period if you've got a strong, brave negotiating team. Our real concern is would the Conservatives be prepared to do that?
And that'll be a concern for a lot of Leavers. I have to say, just to end this, Rich does. I mean, you played a very crucial role in along with Nigel Farage, obviously, in getting us that election, that referendum win in 2016. And it's no doubt at all to me, absolutely, that we would not be in the place we are now to get a Brexit deal or get Brexit over the line in any version, were it not for the Brexit Party, the pressure they put on the Conservative Party and on other parties at European elections. So, for me, I just want all Leavers to be able to share in the win, because I think you hold a lot of responsibility for the fact that we've got to this stage. And look, as a Leave voter, personally, I want to thank you.
Oh, that's very kind. I think there's a lot of hard work to be done from here on. Let's see what tomorrow brings. Who knows? But there's no question. The mood of the country is: can we get this done? Can we move on? And our view is to get it done. It's got to be done properly, and there's still lots of risks and dangers and traps out there and pitfalls, and our job will be to hold the Conservatives to account to avoid that.
Okay, Richard Tice, Brexit Party Chairman, MEP. Thank you very much indeed. This is why I don't work for the BBC. I can actually be honest and give my real view. But at the end of the day, this has been a long, hard road. And if there is a Brexit deal that can actually be voted through by the House of Commons tomorrow, then again, I think everyone who got us here deserves some thanks, whether you're a Remainer or a Leaver. Is this Brexit deal a real Brexit? Is it going to get through the House of Commons tomorrow? And if it doesn't, what happens next? Well, let's put a lot of those questions to my next guest. Frank Field is a former Labour MP. Now sits as an MP for the Social Justice Party, and he's also chair of the Work and Pension Select Committee. He joins us now. Good morning to you, Frank.
Hello.
Good morning. Well, yes, someone is a prominent then Labour MP who campaigned for Leave and a very prominent Leave supporter for many years. What do you make of the Brexit deal that Boris Johnson has done? Is it the Brexit you voted for in 2016?
I don't think there's anything that anybody thought we would be voting for from that original referendum decision. When Parliament voted for a referendum, it ceased to be a party of representatives, and on this issue became a party of delegates. We promised that we would see the decision through, and on tomorrow, on Saturday, we have a serious chance of fulfilling that pledge to the electorate, which all of us have given in manifestos, which we stood on in 2017.
So you're going to vote for the deal tomorrow?
Oh, no question about it.
And how many Labour Leavers do you think you'll bring with you? It's going to be absolutely crucial with the DUP not voting with the government. Even with the DUP voting with the government, it would have been questionable. We've got former Tories who are Remainers, the Amber Rudds and others. Labour Leavers, some 19 ex-Labour people like yourself, sitting as independents effectively, 4 votes. Is that going to be enough to get it over the line? Are there going to be enough of the likes of Stephen Kinnock and others who said, we don't want no deal, we want to deliver on the Brexit manifesto from 2017. Do you think there are enough to get the Boris deal over the line?
I don't know, and I think you'd be foolish to say you do know. But the key thing that we all do know is that it's decision time for those Labour MPs. They cannot kick this can further down the road. The key thing tomorrow is, do we get a deal? And with that, some safety that we're not actually going to have a chaotic, hard Brexit or not. They cannot keep saying, if only this bit changed, if only that bit changed, then of course I'd be fulfilling my constituents' wish to leave the European Union.
Well,
they will be judged tomorrow. The time for kicking the can down the street has ended. They now have to make a decision that what they've been saying all along, of course I would be doing what my constituents want, if only this or that was changed. There isn't going to be any more this or that changing at this point, although we may well change things. I hope we would. when the big bill goes through the House of Commons to give effect to a leave vote. I certainly want to see that we ensure in legislation workers' rights, environmental rights, and similar gains that we have seen, not just from the EU. We actually led the EU.
Well, this is it. This is sort of the big criticisms of Jeremy Corbyn. Before he'd even read the deal, it wasn't even published before he spoke. And he was saying immediately this was a bad deal. It had been selling off assets to the Americans. I don't know where he got that from. But also this was going to be very bad on the environment, very bad on workers' rights. And Jess Phillips, someone who's thought of as a possible contender for future future Labour leader. Oh, it's a Freudian slip there. But there's this idea that the hard fought for rights of workers in this country are only down and only protected by the EU, seems to show very little faith in the British electorate to insist that their political representatives maintain those rights.
It's not. It's worse than that, Julie. It's 100% crap. I mean, many of these rights were rights that were won in the British Parliament and then enforced in Europe with European standards coming up to ourselves. It's crazy. I mean, it's people searching around for excuses not to face on Saturday is decision day, and their electorate will know, are they prepared to carry out the decision of the British people, which was modest but very, very clear that we should leave, or are they then going to declare their hand that they are really Remainers all along? OK,
and what about the calls for a second referendum? We know that, of course, Liberal Democrats and the SNP would say that. We know that a lot of Remain-supporting Labour MPs in your previous party want a second referendum. But we know also that Jeremy Corbyn's not very keen. He's fought against this. The big battle is going to be whether there's a general election before any decision on that. Do you think that there's a possibility this deal might only get through the House of Commons if there is a second referendum amendment attached to it? So basically it can get through only if there's first of all a vote by the British people to vote either for this deal or, as those second referendums want, a Remain option.
Given how weary the country is of Parliament's failure to implement one resolution, then the vote from devolution, you've really got to have something wrong with your head to think the solution to all of this is actually to have a second referendum. The idea that we should actually prolong this agony, I think, is sheer madness. And I would have thought we found it so difficult to implement that decision of the first referendum. To think that we're now going to plunge the country into a second referendum, I think the country would be very displeased.
How do you think that things are going to pan out whether there's a vote for this deal or not, if there's a general election? Because if there is a vote for this deal, then we've got no excuse for there not to be a general election. Right now we've got a government that hasn't got a majority. If we've got a no deal agreed, then more than likely we're going to end up with that extension to end of January, in which case, again, no excuse not to have a general election. How do you think your former party, the Labour Party, is going to fare in that election up against Boris Johnson, a Tory party, with a deal on the table?
I think very badly. I shall be voting for the deal, and I have always voted for the deal, and I've always voted for the earliest possible general election.
Do you think that this is one of the major considerations that the party will have right now? There's a lot of talk there, actually, of wanting to push back the prospect of a general election. But, of course, it might not rely on Labour votes. The SNP quite keen on early general election. Lib Dems, perhaps, as well. They may well, with the Conservative Party and independents, be able to push that through, do you think?
I don't think the Lib Dems will be. If we pass the resolution and get on with the bill to leave Europe, the Lib Dems are finished. I mean, they've put everything around one policy, that they will oppose the decision of the British people at the last referendum. If we get a deal through, a party that has now concentrated everything on saying that it wishes to rat on what the British people came to a decision on, I don't think it's going to stand much chance in the general election.
Let's talk to our next guest, Conservative MEP for the South East of England, Daniel Hannan, a keen Leave campaign, a key part of the Vote Leave campaign, also author of What Next? How to Get the Best from Brexit. Good morning to you, Daniel.
Good morning.
Good
to you,
morning.
Julia.
Now, you're somebody who was willing to sort of go for the withdrawal agreement that Theresa May had. I absolutely wasn't, but certainly this Brexit deal is looking very much more like the Brexit I voted for in 2016. Are you a supporter?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I hate to begin correcting you, but I was against Theresa May's deal on all
I thought
three
you
occasions.
supported it at the end. I know you don't get a vote as an MEP.
No, I didn't get a vote, but I urged MPs to vote against it, and the reason was the backstop. I could live with the other various abominations in it, but the backstop I thought was of a different order because it meant that we were swapping something that we could leave, at least in theory, namely the EU, with something that we couldn't leave. And Boris has succeeded in taking the backstop out completely, but he's also made some other improvements throughout. And this is now a deal that definitely I would support. I'd urge everyone who was elected on a pro-Brexit platform, whether they're Labour or DUP or Conservative, to back it. It gives us back control of our laws, of our borders, of our money, our tax system, our farming and fishing, and it retains good relations with our EU neighbours. I mean, I know the DUP have concerns.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Yeah, a lot of people saying their vote would depend on what the DUP thought.
And look, I mean, Sammy, who you're about to have on your programme, is a friend of mine. I spent a lot of time in the province campaigning with DUP colleagues for a leave vote. So I absolutely get where they're coming from. This deal does not create any divergence, the concept of divergence between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, right? We've had divergence in a number of areas. The issue for the DUP has not been that there can't ever be divergence. Obviously, there are divergences on laws on abortion, same-sex marriage, all sorts of things down the years. The issue is of consent, right? The DUP have a very good, legitimate case for saying the people of Northern Ireland need to decide if we're going to diverge from Great Britain on this or that. And this deal does that. It absolutely ensures that Northern Ireland leaves the UK with Great Britain, that it will participate fully and benefit from the trade deals that the UK can now do as a whole with the United States and India and Japan and China and anybody else. Yes, there are some elements where there will be continuing alignment between the province and the Republic, but frankly, that's the case now, and no one sees that as being the end of the union.
So for you, this is, as I say, apologies for getting that wrong on the withdrawal agreement. This is something you're very happy to vote for. Do you think there are going to be enough MPs in the House of Commons who, unlike you, do get a vote to push this through? We're told the vote is very tight. 320 is the magic number for that, majority of one. A lot of this is going to depend on MPs from the Remainer rebels who were kicked out of the party, of the Tory whip, like Amber Rudd and others, and also Labour Leave voters, the likes of Stephen Kinnock and others, and independents, and as well, of course, the ERG Spartans, although they seem to be coming on board with it. Do you think that Boris Johnson is going to have the votes to get this through?
It is worth remembering that every Labour MP was elected on the basis of a manifesto promise to deliver a Leave vote. Now, some of them are obviously going to go back on their word, but here's the thing. Whether or not this vote goes through tomorrow, Boris wins. Obviously, if the vote goes through, then we are out. We can finally move on to talking about all the other things that Boris wants to talk about, funding the police properly, cutting taxes, and so on. But if it is blocked, it will be obvious to everybody that it was blocked by Remainers, that it was, that Boris delivered. He did something that everyone said he couldn't do. He got the EU to reopen the deal. He got the backstop taken out. He delivered. And then Parliament went back on its word and blocked the deal. And I am very, very happy to fight a general election on that basis because I have every confidence in British voters, including a lot of Remain voters, feeling that it is undemocratic and dishonest of MPs to go back on their word like that.
I mean, this is it, because it's not the end of the road if there is a vote against the deal, because there's a lot up in the air. We've always been promised that there would be a deal or no deal by Boris Johnson by October the 31st. Do you think at that point he's going to go for the no deal? Do you think that there's going to be an extension offered by the European Union? Jean-Claude Juncker, the European Commission President, yesterday said there was no need for any prolongation as he called it, if there was a deal on the table. This is not, of course, a matter for him. It's a matter for the EU 27, the members of the European Council. But do you think there will be an element where they'll just say, look, we've put a deal on the table. We're not going to extend. We don't want to drag this out any further. We're happy with what we've got. And do you think the lack of a possibility of an extension to the Brexit deal might actually focus minds among some of those wavering Tory and Labour Remainers?
Well, remember that it takes only one EU country to say that. It doesn't have to be all 27. It takes only one to say we will veto an extension for Parliament to be put into that position of having to choose between this deal and no deal. And I think that is a possibility. But I would just make a broader democratic argument here. Jeremy Corbyn came out and said, I'm not going to vote for this before it was even published. And the reality is that even if, Corbyn had written the thing himself, he'd still oppose it because he's against everything now. But I would appeal to decent democratic MPs on all sides, those who have spent the last 3 years saying, yes, we have to deliver Brexit, but it has to be done in a reasonable way, in a managed way, in a way that maintains good relations with our allies and neighbours. This deal does that. It gives the Leavers the main thing that they wanted, which is parliamentary sovereignty, and it gives Remainers the issue that they were concerned about, which is a continuing commercial and economic relationship with the EU, and leaving in an orderly and managed way that will preserve our alliance with our immediate neighbours. So there really is logically now no excuse. Of course it's not a perfect deal. Nothing in this world is perfect. Staying in is imperfect, EFTA is imperfect, Chequers was imperfect. Everything has pros and cons. But if you're looking for a deal that takes us out, brings back the sovereignty and supremacy of our parliament, lets us live under our own laws, and does so in a way that maintains good relations with our neighbours, this is the way of doing it.
And just finally, your message, we're going to talk to the DUP Brexit spokesman, Sammy Wilson, up next, as you mentioned him earlier. What would your message be to him, given that vote on a knife edge tomorrow?
Sammy and I campaigned together in Northern Ireland during the referendum. I have a lot of time for Sammy Wilson. I think he's a man of great integrity and great conviction. And I would just ask him to look at the big picture here. Right? This is an opportunity for the UK as a whole to leave the European Union. There may even arguably be some advantages additionally to Northern Ireland that Great Britain doesn't have, in the sense that it will be, if you like, a company that invests there will have guaranteed membership of two different customs blocks. But in any event, this is a way of delivering what his voters in the province voted for, as well as what my voters in the southeast of England voted for. It's a way of keeping the union together, and it's a way of keeping the DUP in the family of the broader movement in the UK as a whole, and not standing outside that political alliance.
What now for the SNP? Do they want to have a general election? Will they be trying to get, as has been suggested yesterday, the sort of deal that Northern Ireland has got when it comes to Brexit, as in, well, not really leaving the EU? That's all coming up right now. Let's turn our attention, as I say, to Northern Ireland with Sammy Wilson, the DUP party's Brexit spokesman. Good morning to you, Sammy.
Good morning.
Good morning. I suppose a real blow to Boris Johnson over the last few days, and particularly yesterday, just before the deal was published, and then after the deal came out, that your party, 10 MPs, crucial votes there for Boris Johnson in Westminster, you will not be voting for this deal. Tell us why you feel this is a Brexit deal that you cannot support.
Well, I think, first of all, the Prime Minister shouldn't be surprised that we'll not be voting for this deal, which really has the rest of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union and Northern Ireland staying in the European Union in terms of being tied to European regulations, and also having a border down the Irish Sea which would require every good which goes into Northern Ireland being subject to customs duties, customs papers having to be submitted, and also then checks within Northern Ireland, rebates for some companies, but causing all kinds of administrative and cash flow problems for them. So it would disadvantage our economy quite seriously. And of course, it's not in keeping with what the Prime Minister promised he would deliver, that the whole of the United Kingdom would leave the EU. And, don't forget, Julia, we did seek to facilitate and give the Prime Minister as much latitude in the negotiations as possible by saying that we would accept for a period regulatory alignment with the EU, But the safeguard would be that the Northern Ireland Assembly would be able to, using the cross-community vote, which is part and parcel of the Good Friday Agreement, would be able to vote to change that arrangement if it was seen to be damaging to the Northern Ireland economy, or if alternative.
Do you feel that you've been sold out?
Well, I do think that he has not honoured the pledges which he made to us, because he sought flexibility from us. We gave him flexibility, and then the other side of the bargain was that he would ensure that Northern Ireland came out on the same terms as the rest of the United Kingdom. He didn't deliver on that, while we delivered on giving him some latitude in the negotiation.
Indeed, and this was certainly what the impression we were getting at the Conservative Party conference when the first outline of a deal was suggested. There are a lot of Brexiteers who are unhappy about the idea of this sort of part border down the Irish Sea. A lot of people unhappy on both sides on that. It was always going to have to be a fudge, though, wasn't it, to avoid the hard border? I'm with you. I never thought that a hard border would ever be put up there. Everyone said they weren't going to do it in terms of infrastructure on the actual border. I've always thought that was people playing politics over the Good Friday Agreement. But there was always going to have to be a fudge. Is this not a livable fudge in the sense that it leaves you with a foot in both camps? You're still, de jure, legally you're still part of the UK customs union in that respect, in terms of goods, but you're also de facto able to carry on that cross-border trade with the Republic of Ireland, which isn't bad for the economy. And there is still, nevertheless, the EU doesn't have the final say on whether this continues. It's the people of Northern Ireland's representatives in the Stormont Assembly. And yes, you've lost your veto, but then, neither does, say, Sinn Féin have a veto. Isn't this not ideal and definitely a fudge and definitely messy, but isn't this perhaps realistically the only possible outcome?
No, it's not, because, of course, there were other outcomes which have been far less damaging to the Northern Ireland economy and far less damaging to Northern Ireland constitutionally, which the Prime Minister has decided not to pursue. And it is, first of all, it will be damaging to our economy because of the reasons I've given you. While on paper we are part of the UK customs territory, in practice we are part of the EU customs union, and that incurs extra costs for Northern Ireland. It incurs administrative burdens for Northern Ireland. It will stop us from participating in any trade deals which the UK enters into if those trade deals involve issues which go against the EU protocols. Not all trade deals would be affected like that, but some would. And then, of course, there's the gradual differences which will occur between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom in terms of regulations. And, a lot of that could have been avoided. And as far as the vote or the ability to get out of it, don't forget, this is an all-Ireland solution. This will tie us tighter and tighter to the Irish economy rather than the British economy as EU laws change, and we have to change those laws, and they're more in line with the Irish laws than with British laws. And that's why Sinn Féin will never vote to leave that. So actually Sinn Féin, by going to the majority voting system away from the cross-community system, will now have a veto. And a veto which they will use because, even if it was disadvantageous to the Northern Ireland economy, if it enabled Sinn Féin to obtain their long-term political gain of a United Ireland, they'll vote for it. If
the deal doesn't get through, and partly that will be down to DUP votes tomorrow, what do you think will happen? Because the options appear to be an extension, possibly a vote for a second referendum with Remain still on the ballot paper, possibly a general election, or a no-deal Brexit. What would be your preference at that point if you don't want this deal?
Yeah, well, Julia, first of all, the real danger for the government, of course, is that even if the deal does go through tomorrow, that will not be the end of the situation, because the Remain parties will either use tomorrow's vote or the Withdrawal Agreement bill, which will have to follow from it, to put in their requirement for a second referendum, and they probably at the moment will have a majority in the House of Commons to be able to do that. So there are real dangers for the government in pursuing the path which they are at present. A much cleaner path would have been simply to say, look, we haven't been able to get a deal with the EU. We will have to have an extension. Once we get that extension, we will have a general election. When we have a general election, we will be appealing to the people of the United Kingdom to give us sufficient of a majority to be able to put through the House of Commons the kind of deal which is fair to the whole of the United Kingdom. And of course, you have more chance of getting that at that stage, because the EU will realise that they no longer have a House of Commons working on their behalf. They will have a House of Commons which is working to get Britain out. So, I could have, and we outlined this to the Prime Minister. There's a much better way of delivering on Brexit. It may have meant him having to write a letter, which he said he didn't want to write. But, Boris Johnson's pride should not come before the best deal for the United Kingdom.
Alistair Burt is former Foreign Office Minister, Conservative MP, and one of those Remainer rebels who lost the whip. Good morning to you, Alistair.
Morning, Julia.
Good morning to you. Yes, yes, absolutely. It has been an extraordinary 24 hours. About half an hour after I got off yesterday, we discovered there was going to be a Brexit deal. A lot of people looking into that deal. Some people not even waiting for it to be published, like Jeremy Corbyn, and saying it was a terrible deal. A lot of other people on the Brexit side are looking at whether it was Brexit in name only or a real Brexit. The general view seems to be this is Brexit that will keep Leave voters happy and Leave campaigners happy. But people like you who campaigned for Remain have remained very staunchly opposed to Brexit throughout. How are you going to vote tomorrow?
I've not remained staunchly against Brexit throughout. I've voted for the withdrawal deal on 3 occasions, and I only lost a bit the other week because I don't want to see no deal, and I won't see no deal. I will do everything I can to prevent that. But as far as Brexiteers are concerned, I'm not one and won't be one. I think something's been agreed which enables us to leave the European Union, which was the result of the referendum, and then start the process of negotiating with the EU on other things and move forward. I think that's the right course of action for the country. I don't believe it's possible to put the genie back in the bottle and reverse what has happened. I don't think the country wants to do that. But we've got to forge a new relationship with the EU. It requires leaving, and I'm voting for that. If people think that's Brino in name only and don't want to do it, fine. I'll simply start a campaign again for staying in. If they won't accept this, then I don't think they're going to get anything.
And do you think there are many of your colleagues, there's 21 Remainer rebels who are going to join you in the voting on tomorrow?
Yes, I mean, they've all got their own individual views, but my sense is the majority of those of us who voted the way we did the other week are resolute about no deal, but we're not. We're not Remainers, and we're not anti-Brexit. We've accepted the result of the referendum, but are very clear that the best way forward for the country was to do it with a deal. And I think we've been successful in forcing the pace of the negotiations in the last couple of weeks when people said we'd cut the legs off the negotiations. No, we didn't. We've actually got somewhere now. It's not perfect. No deal ever is. But 28 states have now agreed this between themselves for a second time. We were told in the past the EU would get in the way. They didn't want us to leave. They put every blockage in. And once again, it'll come down to the situation that the EU have agreed for us to leave twice. And if Parliament rejects it again, well, everybody will scratch their heads and wonder what on earth it is the United Kingdom really wants.
Well, I mean, Ken, you could say, you're saying that this Ben Act, the so-called Surrender Act, didn't actually scupper the chances of Boris getting a deal. You could argue, actually. No. Imagine what an amazing deal we would have got if you hadn't done that, and we really had a much stronger possibility of no deal. We'll never know the answer to that. No. But do you think that history? I see no reason why you think that would be ridiculous. Do you think the history books will look more fondly on the Remainer rebels or the Leavers who persevered in the years to come?
Oh, I don't think we know at this stage, Julia, and that's a good question and a serious question. It will depend on where we go from here. I think one of the things we've got to face up to is that once we've completed the process or completed this stage of the process, we really do have to leave behind Remainer, Outer, Leaver, all this, because what will matter to the United Kingdom is where we take ourselves. I've heard a lot this morning from people who don't like the deal on the grounds that the political declaration takes away some of the suggestions that we would be, closely aligned with the EU on workers' rights and environmental standards. And I don't agree, because I think that will be meant for the United Kingdom. If a political party comes forward determined to drive out workers' rights and lower environmental standards because it wants to create some sort of Singapore on the edge of Europe, I hope people don't vote for them. People will start as you have always wanted and others have wanted. We'll take back control. We'll make our own decisions. And I hope people will then use their votes to elect the political parties that will create the United Kingdom that they want to see. They won't be able to blame Brussels anymore. It'll be all down to us. But there's no reason why there should be any lessening of standards in justice, environment, workers' rights, because that's a matter for the UK. And it will depend on that and how successful that is when people look back and say whether this was something terrible we should never have done, or whether, in fact, it's worked and we've got a new relationship with Europe. I'll be positive about that future relationship, but it will be down to us. And we've got to stop looking back and start looking forward.
Yeah, do you think, I mean, again, that's something that I would hope for. I felt quite emotional when I actually sort of got to grips with what the deal actually involved, and it looked to me like something I'd actually voted for in 2016. Do you think that if this does get through, if we don't have to have a second referendum, we don't end up with an extension or a no deal, that actually this can start the healing? And there was a lot that Boris Johnson was saying in one of his statements yesterday when he was speaking on his own and just talking about, moving forward and just sort of putting this behind us. I would love not to have to introduce guests on my studio, my show, as a Leaver or a Remainer, and that this becomes irrelevant because we're all just moving on and we can talk about other things. Do you think that we can actually heal those rifts, or do you think those rifts are going to be there forever?
I don't think we'll be there forever. I absolutely share your determination that we should start to leave some tags behind, but it won't be immediate. It will depend on attitude and how we approach this. I've always tried to be fair, and I hope that's one of the reasons you have me on from time to time. We don't agree on the referendum or the results of the referendum, but we both agree that we want the sort of country for the future that we're proud of. We would like to fulfil any politician's desire that this is the greatest country in the world to live in, and the Prime Minister is not unreasonable in suggesting that. And I want to see that we take our place doing that, but we share it with partners who are very close to us. I regret and I'm sad that we will leave the EU. I make no bones about that. But it was a sovereign decision of the United Kingdom, and I think the responsibility of us going forward is not just to make the best of it in some sort of mealy-mouthed way, but to be positive about it for the future, for our children, grandchildren, all that. I hope it will mean that we stay close to those in the European Union who will realise that by their own errors, they've helped to produce a situation in which Brexit became likely, and that the EU will reform and that the United Kingdom will stay close, but that we will look forward. And in that process, as we start to recognise, as I said earlier, we won't be able to blame Brussels for anything that goes wrong. Political parties will look at themselves, and if they don't get votes for things, and if they're not successful, it'll be down to them. And therefore, maybe the political parties will sharpen up their offer to the British public and realise they won't be able to disguise anything. If you want a sort of low-cost, dangerously, environmentally standard sort of country, then don't vote for them. And if you want to avoid
But the key thing would be a choice. Is it a good idea for the SNP to claim that, yes, you don't want Brexit, you've been anti-Brexit all along, and you want independence? Obviously, those are given. But to try and, suppose, piggyback on what Northern Ireland has got the arrangement there, even though not the support of the DUP, when there are very special historical reasons why the Northern Ireland arrangement will be different from the rest of the UK.
Yeah, we absolutely understand that Northern Ireland will have special arrangements. There is a reality here, Juliet, that England voted for Brexit, it's getting Brexit. Wales voted for Brexit, it's getting Brexit. Northern Ireland voted to remain, but it's getting special status. And then Scotland voted to remain, but it's getting nothing out of this. Back in 2016, we outlined in Scotland's Place in Europe, the paper put forward by the Scottish Government, that we wanted to compromise, that we understood that people in the UK had voted to leave the European Union, but we wanted to come to some sort of sensible compromise that would work for Scotland, and that meant we all remaining in the single market, the customs union. And for me, as a Glasgow Member of Parliament, there is a kind of inescapable reality here that under the deal that's been negotiated, many businesses based in Glasgow who want access to the single market and the customs union will simply hop across the Irish Sea and base themselves in Dublin, and that puts Scotland at a serious competitive disadvantage. So we absolutely understand that Northern Ireland's got to be looked after, but it is leaving Scotland at a serious competitive disadvantage, which is really, really disappointing.
I mean, quite apart from the fact that it is worth mentioning that Scotland, England, Wales, and I mean the votes weren't counted on a constituency basis, and they weren't counted on a regional basis or on a country basis. They were counted on the whole of the UK, and part of that came about because, of course, in 2014 you lost the referendum to be an independent nation from the UK. But the arguments you're giving against the EU and having any sort of different regulation or any customs or any issues at all, those are exactly the same arguments that count against your argument to leave the United Kingdom.
No, I mean, so in 2014, I was hugely involved in the Yes campaign, and I remember one of the kind of things that really kind of frankly stunned our campaign was, these leaflets coming out saying what's the best way to secure Scotland's membership of the European Union? Well, it's to vote no. And so people dutifully did that in 2014. A lot of people went along and thought, right, OK, we want to stay in the European Union, so we want to stay in the United Kingdom. And then 2 years later, they found themselves being dragged out. So that's why in 2016, we understood at that point that, look, we've campaigned, you're right, we're anti-Brexit. But the UK as a whole had voted to leave, but taking into account the close nature of that vote and the constituent parts of the UK, for example, like Northern Ireland and Scotland, were clearly uncomfortable with that. We needed to try and get some sort of compromise.
I undoubtedly think that you've got a mandate for a second referendum because, there has been a quite clear change in circumstances. However, if there were a second referendum and if you won it, and again, those are big ifs. There's one recent poll, of course, said 50% for leaving the United Kingdom in Scotland. But again, that's the best poll you've had in quite a few years. Otherwise, they've stuck really rather stubbornly to the vote in 2014 of 45% in favour of leaving the UK, 55% in favour of staying as part of the UK. Let's say you've got that mandate. Let's say you've got the second referendum. In the event of you voting a vote to leave by Scotland, you then have to renegotiate entry to the European Union. At that point, you'd be required under the current rules of the European Union to join the euro. You then, of course, have created all the problems, but without the history of terrorism in terms of a border with England. You'd create all of the problems that you say are the problems that you don't like and think would be an economic disadvantage to Scotland by us leaving the European Union, by leaving the United Kingdom. I mean, your arguments just don't wash, do they?
No, I think they do. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing during this entire process is that small independent nations aligned to the European Union, such as the Republic of Ireland, are actually treated with respect and equality. And what we see at the moment is just Scotland kind of being frozen out by the UK. And that's why we appear to be getting this really raw deal that puts it as a kind of serious...
Well, you're not getting a raw deal. You're getting the same deal as England.
England and Wales both voted for that. That's a different.
Yeah, but we've already established the fact that the vote wasn't counted on that basis. But please, could you tackle the point I've just made, that all of your arguments against leaving the EU are arguments against leaving the United Kingdom, but they're tenfold because of the huge amount of trade that you do with the rest of the UK?
No, I wouldn't accept that. I mean, I think that we do need to kind of think about our future in terms of whether we want to be an independent country. And I think that the polls in Scotland are certainly pointing to the direction that people want the right to choose their future. I mean, if the Brexit process has highlighted one thing and one thing only, it's been that Scotland is just absolutely shut out of this United Kingdom. We're being ignored.
In what way shut out? Your vote to remain in the European Union counted exactly the same as my vote to leave. In what way were you shut out?
Because you voted to leave, and that vote has been respected, but 62% of Scots decided that they wanted to remain. And in 2016, the Scottish Government said, look, let's compromise, and that fell upon deaf ears, and the deal has been brought back by Boris Johnson arguably is worse than Theresa May's. So Scotland has been shut out of this process.
Well, you mean it's worse because it's more Brexit?
Pardon me?
You think it's worse because it's more like Brexit?
Well, yeah, I mean, it certainly is worse because it means that businesses in Scotland will have the opportunity to look to Northern Ireland and think, you know what, we'll move over there, and that means people losing their jobs.
Is there nothing else that would keep people living in Scotland? I mean, a lot of people, despite the fact they could make more money from moving, people could move to the Republic of Ireland right now and lower corporation tax and things, but they don't. And we're constantly told that all these businesses are going to leave the City of London because we're leaving the EU, but they don't. Actually, most companies don't do that.
A lot of the businesses have actually.
No, there isn't actually.
Are doubling in
quite the contrary. Most companies don't. A lot of companies, a lot of businesses are family run. People stay where they are. But again, you have still, I think this is the third time now I'm going to try and attempt to make you simply say it's not the case. But it is the case that all of the economic arguments that you give about why you think leaving the EU is wrong for Scotland are exactly the same, but exacerbated by a massive factor for you not to leave the UK as well. I mean, you still keep saying, I disagree with that, but you haven't given me a reason why.
There's plenty of evidence out there to suggest that Scotland would in fact be better off economically independent within the European Union. In fact, polling suggests in Scotland, the recent poll in the Times has shown that as well. But there is a reality here, Julia, that this whole process is crystallising things for people in Scotland. That the only way for us to move forward and choose our own future is by way of independence.
Yep.
And if we remain stuck to the United Kingdom, then we're going to see many more situations like we're going to see this weekend, whereby a deal can be brought forward that puts Scotland at a disadvantage, and that will have an impact on our economy. So it's no wonder that people in Scotland are now thinking, do you know what, let's have another look again. And that's why it's important Scotland has the right to choose its own future.
Yep, we'll end on a note of agreement. I couldn't agree with you more. I think for Scotland, again, I'm a big fan of self-determination. David Linden, SNP MP, thank you so much for joining me. Let's get straight on with our next guest. Foreign Secretary, First Secretary of State, Dominic Raab joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Well, there seems to be certainly a spring in the step of a lot of Conservatives and a lot of Brexiteers, not necessarily the same thing, this morning. Can you tell us why this deal is so much better, as has been claimed, than the withdrawal agreement that Theresa May failed to pass 3 times in the House of Commons? What makes it better?
Well, there's 2 or 3 things. First of all, we've removed the undemocratic backstop, so we're not caught as a country in a whole slew of laws from customs to social policy and tax policy over which we've got no say and no exit. We've got a great deal for Northern Irish businesses and Northern Ireland as a whole because they stay within the UK customs territory, but they're also got access to the European market and frictionless trade with Ireland. So I think that's really important. And I guess fundamentally, in terms of the future relationship, we're in a place now with the political declaration that we can transition to a best-in-class free trade agreement and cooperate with the EU in all the areas we want to cooperate, but we do so as a sovereign nation. So this is win-win-win. It's good for the EU as well. That's why they've signed up to it. So it's a chance for everyone, Leavers, Remainers, and all those people who were points along the spectrum to sign up to something which, yes, it was a compromise, but delivers on the referendum and allows the country to move forward.
A lot of people hoping that this does allow the country to move forward. The DUP, though, quite clearly feel that they've been sold out. If those 10 votes that DUP MPs had were absolutely crucial to getting this out over the line, if perhaps Boris Johnson hadn't lost his majority by getting all those people off the Tory whip for the Remainer rebels over the Benn Act, he would be more reliant on those DUP votes. Do you think they would have been sold out then? And do you think it's fair to say that they have been sold out?
No, I don't think there's anything like that going on, but we've got to do the right thing by the whole country and Northern Ireland and all communities in Northern Ireland. But what I will keep talking to our DUP friends and colleagues, the point that we make is we've maintained a situation where the Northern Ireland is part of the UK customs territory, but also has access to the Republic, trade with the Republic and the EU single market. That's a special position. I think a lot of Northern Irish businesses will be thrilled about that. And in terms of another big difference from the last deal is that there's a consent mechanism, which means that the Northern Ireland Assembly can by majority, not just once but every 4 years, decide whether it wants to stay in this special arrangement, which does require them to adhere to EU rules on agri-food and manufactured products, a limited number of regulations, and that was always what the EU were insisting on. So that consent mechanism, that democratic mechanism, is something that is different. I think it's time now to get this deal done. Allow the country to move forward, turn the page on the rancorous, bitter politics we've had in the UK, and also on the difficult negotiations we've had with our EU partners, so we can concentrate on the positives for the future.
It was quite nice to see Boris Johnson as a British Prime Minister being sort of slapped on the back and smiled at by some of those EU 27 leaders, indeed some of those in the European Commission and Council as well. Makes a very big change from that recent years, does it not? Let's talk about what happens tomorrow then. If the deal can get through, if it does, it slips through by a handful of votes. That's going to rely on some of those Labour Remainer rebels. It's also going to rely on a lot of those Tory Remainer rebels as well. Whose votes do you think you can count on? Do you think you can get it through?
We want to draw on all votes right across the Conservative Party, right across the House of Commons, and we'll do it by showing that this is a good deal, pulled off by the Prime Minister, despite all the doubters saying it could never be done. And I think talking about the substance of this deal. We've allayed the fears of those who were worried about no deal. If they want to avoid no deal now, they need to vote for this deal or take responsibility for what comes next. And I haven't heard a clear, coherent or credible plan from anyone who's planning to vote against the deal. And for Brexiteers, we can point to all the positives of this deal. We're going to have total control over our laws. We're going to be able to end free movement and move to a points-based immigration system, and we're free to chart our course in the world with global free trade deals. So this is win-win-win, and I think that actually it will focus minds on the lack of, for all John McDonnell has been talking about this morning, or Jeremy Corbyn, they've got no plan. They want to see us stuck in the mud because that allows them to exploit the situation for political purposes. I think there'll be a lot of Labour MPs who see through that and who are conscious of the promises that they've made on Brexit. This is the way, get this deal done, get Britain motoring forward.
I want to come back to what happens if a deal isn't done, or indeed what happens even if a deal is done in terms of an election. But just on the point of, you mentioned John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor. Jeremy Corbyn came out and criticised the deal before it had actually been published, before he'd had a chance to read it. And we knew he was always going to be opposed to whatever a Tory Brexit deal would be. John McDonnell also critical, and a number of others on the front bench who were very keen on a second referendum. A lot of the criticism has been about the fact that this is a Brexit deal that is going to be bad for workers' rights and bad for the environment. What do you make of those criticisms, and how do you counter them?
We've made absolutely clear there'll be no diminution, no lessening of workers' rights, environmental or social protections. The crucial thing is that elected members of Parliament will be accountable to your listeners for all of those incredibly sensitive decisions. And in relation to John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn, they're in the ludicrous position where Jeremy Corbyn's official position is he would, as Prime Minister, renegotiate a deal, and yet John McDonnell has said, well, we'd have a second referendum and I'd campaign for Remain and therefore against Jeremy Corbyn's deal. That's ludicrous. Every one of your listeners, whether they're Labour, Conservative, Remainer or Leaver, can see through that. It's just not credible.
What if the only way the deal can get through tomorrow in the House of Commons is if there is a confirmatory vote to which puts, I mean, like what we've had suggested by those in favour of a second referendum would effectively be the deal or Remain, no deal option, and keeping Remain on the ballot paper. If the only way of getting the deal through is to have that vote, it goes back to the British people. Would Boris Johnson or other members of your cabinet, would you agree to that?
No, and it can't be done without the government agreeing it because it requires a so-called money resolution which only the government can put forward. So the second referendum isn't on the cards. And I think a lot of people would just absolutely, their hearts would sink at the idea that far from getting this done and moving forward, we'd go back to the beginning and re-debate all of the issues in the referendum. It doesn't seem to me that anyone proposing that has got a clear path forward. And both the Labour and Liberal Democrat leaderships say that in any event, they would campaign to Remain. And in the Lib Dems case, they say they would ignore the referendum anyway. So I don't think those are credible positions. For those that want to give effect to the democratic mandate in the referendum and get this country moving forward, they should be voting for this deal on Saturday and give effect, as I said, to the people's wishes to get Brexit respected and then done, and then the country can move on and talk about all the other things I suspect you would like to be interviewing us about and your listeners would like to be hearing about.
Amen to that. But what if a deal doesn't pass? Let's say it's just a handful of votes doesn't pass. Will the Prime Minister want to just bring it back again and again as Theresa May did with her withdrawal agreement, even when she'd lost by hundreds of votes? Would we be moving towards a no deal of Brexit? Would there be a letter signed as required by the Ben Act, the so-called Surrender Act, asking for transition? Would the European Union agree to it? Jean-Claude Juncker, the European Commission President, said yesterday he didn't think there was any reason to have any prolongation. It's not up to him. He's not a leader of one of the EU 27 countries, but would you expect that some of those countries might veto that? What do you think actually happens? So a deal gets voted down in the House of Commons. What happens next?
Well, we've said we'll make sure we leave by the end of October. You've highlighted the EU concerns about any further delay. So I think those that vote against this deal, and this ought to focus minds, and many of them are people that in good faith want to see the UK staying in the EU, campaigned to stay in the EU during the referendum, but they would end up courting the no-deal scenario that they say they want to avoid the most. That's the perversity of the position that Jeremy Corbyn and Jo Swinson find themselves in, and I think for a lot of moderate Labour MPs, they will look very carefully at the terms of the deal, the promises they made to their voters, and I think there's a strong case for getting this done now, and I think there'll be a lot of support cross-party for this.
And in terms of whether or not this means we can move on to a general election, the reality is even if this deal does pass, you can barely get any other legislation through, no majority whatsoever, a government in office but not in power. If a deal does go through, or there's an extension, or we no deal, assuming at that point, one of those many scenarios, we are going to move towards a general election at some point in the coming weeks and months. How soon do you think that will be? And do you think that passing the Brexit deal neutralises the Brexit issue and we then talk about issues like the NHS, education or whatever? Or do you think that Boris Johnson will get a bounce and get rewarded by the British public for getting that deal?
I think the public want to see us get Brexit done, but they also at the same time want to see us moving on and talking about our positive agenda for expanding broadband to boost the economy, cutting the cost of living pressures for hard-working, lower middle income families, talking about the extra police we want to put on the street. And I think for those that are holding the country back from doing that, from delivering Brexit and getting onto those bread and butter issues that voters care about, they'll be accountable at the ballot box. And Jeremy Corbyn and Jo Swinson and the people that are trying to block Brexit will have nowhere to hide because they don't have a credible plan to take Britain forward. And we've been calling for an election on the Conservative side and they've been blocking it. But that's a question that they'll have to answer, hopefully to you, but also to their voters.
Can I also ask you about the Brexit Party? Nigel Farage came out rather critical of the deal. There's still sort of a wait and see, I suppose, view from a lot of Brexiteers who feel that, well, you know, we should have held out for no deal. What would you say to the Brexit Party and their supporters today?
I think a lot of Brexit Party supporters who were disaffected Conservatives will look at this deal and hopefully see on the substance that it gives effect to the referendum mandate, allows us to take control of our laws, end free movement, sign free trade deals and get this done. And I think it will show, if we can get this done, that the Conservatives have been faithful to their promises. But of course, the naysayers on all sides will have their political reasons for trying to say that this is a bad deal. The problem is they don't really have a credible alternative of their own, and that's why the Prime Minister has pulled off this deal despite all of the doubters. He's got a path forward, and I can't see any credible alternatives being presented by the others. And I understand Nigel talks about no deal. We, on our side, we said we want a deal. As long as it's a good deal, we want a deal. And I think that's the way we get this Brexit issue resolved, faithful to the referendum, but allow the country to move forward and come together again.
Let's talk about what is going to happen with the Liberal Democrat MP, Chuka Umunna. Good morning to you, Chuka.
Morning,
Good
Julia.
morning. Well, very well indeed. I'm saying there's a certain spring in my step today. It won't surprise you. After getting into the under the skin and looking at the details of this Brexit deal, very wary, I've got to be honest, of another sellout alongside the Withdrawal Agreement. But looks to me like this is actually a meaningful Brexit, which presumably is why you're going to be voting against it.
Well, it won't get Brexit done, this withdrawal agreement. And then, in fact, I think the British people are going to get done over because according to the government's own economic impact assessments of these proposals, real wages will drop by 6.4% and GDP will drop by 6.7%. And to put that in context, that is akin to the fallout from the global financial crash. The second point, Julia, and you and I have talked about this before, is not a deal. We've got to stop calling it a deal because it doesn't include a legally binding trade agreement. That is due to be negotiated after any withdrawal agreement is finalised.
It's a deal to leave, not
years.
a deal for the future. We understand that.
Well, I'm glad you say that because we are told that it is a deal that deals with everything and will get Brexit done. It won't get Brexit done in that sense whatsoever. There'll be still years more uncertainty. And I have to say...
Well, wait a second. You were about to say it takes 8 years. It takes the EU 8 years to do deals with countries with whom they don't already have... No, but this is the thing. We're always told it takes years and years to do deals. It takes years to do deals because...
It will take... Well, I've been told by EU officials and also people who actually attend the European Council meetings that it will take at least 3 years to do. Nobody thinks that it will take any less time than that. And the problem that we've got is we therefore are currently, all we've done is really extend the gangplank because the implementation period, which would kick in after any withdrawal agreement were passed, if it is passed, I don't think it will be, finishes at the end of next year. So all of what we're going through now with, will we, won't we leave without it, all this business, this will all come back yet again at the end of next year. Now, it's great for the media in a way because it's great copy, the drama, lots to talk about, sells papers, gets people listening to your fantastic programme, Julia. But actually, that isn't a good thing overall for the country. And that's why, I've always been very upfront with you. We want to stop Brexit altogether. If you want to stop this chaos, stop it.
But this is it. You say you've got to stop the chaos. But let's be honest, what would not be a good thing for the country would be to drag this out any further. Look, if you want to have a nice clean break and move on, hey, I'm very happy with the no-deal Brexit, sugar. But the reality is you want to drag this out and drag out the divisiveness and the anger and the arguments for longer than necessary. You want to have if the Lib Dems got elected, you would just simply revoke Article 50. If you think Brexit's going away like that, I think frankly you need help. But from the many white coats, it's not going away like that. But even with a second referendum, more division, more battling, more years of the country turning on itself. Is this not the best compromise for actually implementing the vote that you, along with other MPs, said would be implemented in 2016 if the people voted for Brexit? But it's not the no deal that you say you fear and you think would be a disaster for the country. And we can start healing those divisions and start moving on.
Well, let's just go through some of those multiple points that you made. I agree with you that we're unlikely to settle this Brexit debate once and for all either way over the next few years. I'm afraid I think our relationship with the European Union will be a subject of vigorous debate for many years to come, perhaps even when I'm on my deathbed. So on that, I agree. On that, I agree with you. Secondly, I don't agree that the only way just to get this thing off the table so we can focus on the real issues is to go ahead with a deeply damaging, hard Brexit, which is what the Prime Minister's offering. I mean, you can do it that way, but it will do immense damage to the country, or you could just stop it altogether. And if there was a majority Liberal Democrat government, that is what we would do, because Brexit's taking up all the bandwidth, is meaning that things like more funding for the NHS, dealing with knife crime, ensuring our schools are preparing people for the future, all of those types of issues are not getting the attention they deserve. I also don't agree with you, but that simply pursuing the course of supporting the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement, as you're advocating, is going to resolve the issue for the reason that I gave, which is that is the end of the beginning. It's not the beginning of the end, and it will lead to many more years of negotiation of a trade agreement. Whereas actually, I'd say that the best trade agreement we've got is membership of the EU, and that's why.
I know you think that, but the British people were asked, and they gave their view on that. If there was a possibility of getting this through, this deal through, but only with a second referendum being promised, what would you vote then?
Well, we've said that pending there being a general election, the best way to resolve this is to refer it back to the people in a people's vote. We would campaign to remain. Remain must be on the ballot, and unlike the Labour Party, we're not prevaricating on that. We will support remaining in the European Union, and there must be a defined form of Brexit on that ballot paper as well, and that could be the Prime Minister's Brexit. He's not proposing to add a referendum to what he is putting to the House of Commons on Saturday, which is why we have put down an amendment to the Queen's speech to be debated at the beginning of next week, providing for a people's vote. So that's where we are at the moment. But that said, I mean, Judah, I'm sure you've been talking this morning on, how long does this Parliament go on for? Because it does have...
That was going to be my next question, indeed.
Yeah. And I just don't see, the government cannot govern. It cannot really get any legislation through. It has... it's a minority administration with a majority of minus 45. That is not a sustainable proposition. And I think, it's quite likely that if the Prime Minister doesn't get his withdrawal agreement through on Saturday, he'll seek to move towards a general election. So I think that's definitely a very real prospect.
Would you vote for a general election to happen?
My preference would be for us to have a people's vote to resolve the Brexit issue. But I think you could
call a general election a people's vote. It's a vote with people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I mean, I think that's just where it's going to end up, and I'm not, I don't have a problem with that, because I think it's got the end of day feel about it. It's a zombie parliament, and it's coming to the end of its life, and it's very visible. People can see that it's dysfunctional. It's not working.